Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. Today, I'm excited to engage in a rich conversation with my next guest, whose extensive experience spans art curation and museum education. Currently, my guest is the curator of European art 300 to 1400 CE at the Walters Art Museum. Please welcome Christine Sciacca. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I like the black lip. I must say that it's like a dark. I like it. It has like a gothic thing going on. I'm like, this is great.
I do my best
in a non-visual medium, right?
Right, exactly.
So to begin, I always like to go back to sort of the origin of some of those early moments that ignited sort of the path that you're on now, this career that you're in now, and the art you're curator. And I see, art history and museum education. I see a lot of stuff in this background. So what is that sort of early art or creativity sort of story, that touchstone that led you in a direction towards European art and in the work that you're doing today?
Yeah, I have a sort of long-standing relationship with art history. I was very fortunate to have actually AP art history in my high school. I grew up outside New York, and it was one of those things where I took it as an elective. I had a fantastic teacher, Fran Bisso. She's still around, and she kind of introduced me to, there was a survey course, and I thought, well, this is all really interesting. I can sort of get at past history through objects and, these incredible pieces that are the products of human creation. And, they can actually help us learn about periods, especially when you go way back, where we don't actually have much documentation. These are sort of our documents, are these incredible objects that were created. So I went to college sort of thinking, I don't really know what I want to study, but I'm going to try, throw in some art history there. And I started to get more and more hooked. I kind of thought I was going to do Italian Renaissance for a while. I speak Italian. My part of my heritage is Italian. But then I had a professor who was teaching medieval art, and he took us into our rare book library. I went to Cornell University, took us into the rare book library and pulled out some medieval manuscripts. Now, I had never experienced manuscripts in my survey in high school. It was just like, let's learn about cathedrals, maybe some stained glass. Had no context for this. So that kind of blew my mind that people would take so much time and attention to create a book, out of expensive materials like parchment, gold, these pigments they had to import into Europe. And that really kind of grabbed me and sort of think, okay, books are really important to people. They're still important to us today, but to lavish this kind of attention on a book like that, there's something going on here. So that kind of got me started on the path to being first a manuscripts curator and then eventually an objects curator like I am today. And, it's one of those things that I feel like it's a very easy thing to understand. We all own books in some shape or form. And this was just how important they were to people back then. And they hold a lot of history, and they hold a lot of, I think they're very compelling for us still today.
Wow. And thank you. It's funny. I always like to point out when, a guest answers like two questions in one. So thank you for overachieving. Maybe you're running the show. I don't really know.
I have more to say about manuscripts.
Keep it going. I mean, so I guess to put a final point on it. So sort of the sort of manuscripts, how has that kind of influenced your perspective on like storytelling, specifically in like European art?
Yeah, I think, manuscripts is an interesting field. It's a very specialized field. And if you sort of read art history books about manuscripts, sometimes they'll just have the images pulled out, like kind of like they're little paintings. But the fascinating thing about manuscripts is those images are on a page with words. The artist is responding to the text that's right next to it. So that kind of hooked me as well. What if an artist is illustrating a book or a text for the first time? Like, what about, Dante's Inferno? And you're just sort of how do you visually express what Dante is describing in words? So I got very interested in sort of how do artists respond to the text? How does the text and image interplay on the page? In the medieval period, they're often very intertwined. You get these elaborate initials, these elaborate letters. They have pictures in them, in the letters themselves of the text. So, certainly I think narrative plays into it, but really I was interested in that relationship between text and image and, this incredible relationship that happens in these books. And the way I sort of, I'll just answer a third question while I'm at it. So, how did I come to Ethiopian art? So I, decided to pursue a PhD in medieval art history, specifically in manuscripts. I go to Columbia. I'm learning all about manuscripts from all over, and I think I sort of understand all there is to know about manuscripts, right? More or less. So I take this African art survey, and my professor puts up these images of Ethiopian manuscripts on the screen, like gospel books that hold the writings of the four evangelists, and she puts them up on the screen from the same time period as the European books I'm studying, and my mind just kind of exploded because this was never discussed in any medieval course I had. At the time, if you took a course in African art, you often wouldn't hear about Ethiopian art either. I lucked out with my professor, who is Zoe Struther at Columbia. And that kind of took me on the path to thinking about, what was going on in Ethiopia in the same period that I'm looking at in Europe. A lot of the same types of things are being produced in their own visual language, right? So that kind of took me on the path to Ethiopian art, and the sort of text image relationship is a really big deal in Ethiopian art, not just in the manuscripts they produced, but also if you look at Christian icons in Ethiopia, the figures are all labeled with their names or describing who they are, what they're doing, and written in the ancient Ethiopic language is. And so that to me is it's almost like an extension of manuscripts for me, where you have that text and image really playing into a single object.
Wow, I like that. And we're going to put a pin in that. We're going back to that. We're going to go back
Okay.
to that. So and thank you for that, because that really is having the gears turn.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is written weirdly. I hate when I wrote down the delicate dance between past and present. But from your perspective as a curator and the work that you've done, like how do you sort of like connect sort of the past to the present in that way? Like sort of this has this history, this has this sort of lineage attached, and bringing it for like an audience that's like contemporary, that's current. And it's like, what is this? How do we go about this, and the historical significance around it?
Yeah, and I should first say I have no context for not caring about the past, because I care a lot about the past. So I had to kind of put myself in people's shoes. There's a few ways to do it. One, I sort of see that there's some themes that are kind of universal, no matter where you're talking about the world, where you're talking about in terms of time period. How do we express our beliefs? How do we adorn ourselves? How do we sort of cope with death and various aspects of daily life? Like all those things are pretty universal. So if you can kind of hook onto those themes and how they played out in past and past visual culture, then I think, or I hope to think, that it sort of draws people in and they can find something that they can relate to themselves. Some of my favorite objects at the Walters are these huge brooches that were worn on the shoulders of a woman, actually, during the sort of period of the Vikings, right? This is the Visigothic tribe that was traveling through Germany and into Spain. And they are two massive eagles made out of garnet and gold. And you can imagine somebody showing up in that town with wearing these on their cloak. I mean, that is what you are telling people about yourself. I'm wealthy, I'm powerful, and I'm here, so that is something that I think we can all relate to. So that's just one example of how you can do that. Another thing that I'm trying to do, and I think we're trying to do with the Walters, is to bring in some very carefully thought out contemporary art pieces that actually respond to the historical art that we have. So you probably know we just acquired a wonderful piece of stained glass by Kehinde Wiley. That's now in our medieval galleries, so you can see it next to examples of medieval stained glass and sort of what he was thinking about and what people were thinking about in the past, and kind of make it all very present day. It's still happening. This art form was invented in the Middle Ages, and you still have contemporary artists practicing it today. So that's certainly one way that I've tried to kind of make those connections. And in the Ethiopia at the Crossroads show, if I could plug the show for a moment, we've got examples of contemporary art kind of throughout the exhibition. So the exhibition is mostly chronological, but it's kind of scattered through the whole thing. We have a lot of Ethiopian contemporary artists thinking about historical Ethiopian art. So they are kind of calling on the themes, they're using the language, they're using the imagery, in their work. And so I put some of those examples side by side with the historical pieces so that you can really see that connection there. I mean, you can talk about it all you want, but I think when you really see it side by side, that kind of brings it home. So I think that's another way that people can realize, okay, there's an artist creating this, in the past 5 years, but they're thinking about, Ethiopian art from 1,000 years ago, right? So I think that's another way to make people feel connected and kind of understand that, these traditions carry on and they're very much alive and well, especially for the Ethiopian community.
100%. That's great. We tend to return to things, I think. It's just
Hmm.
like when I'm trying to justify what this is as a medium or what have you, it's like it's press, it's journalism, it's this, it's that. But it's like this
Hmm.
is something you've likely heard before or seen before, maybe in a different way. And it goes back, one could do the sort of oral histories of things with griots and so on. It's just like
Hmm.
the storytelling component and it's centuries there. Or
Yes.
one of the things that I really dig is I've been doing a lot of movie related stuff, film festival stuff recently. Hush, hush, hint, hint. But in making references to stuff because I've been looking at movies from like the 20s, and I'm like, oh,
Yep.
I see this in some more recent stuff or what have you. So those connections are
Mhm.
there just by observing.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think we're all sort of the product of what we've learned. And, I mean, I'm still thinking of art history I learned about, in high school, right? It's still with me today, and I'm still continuing to learn. And I think that, many of the Ethiopian artists in the exhibition, they are raised on this material. They know, I often say that, anybody on my advisory committee, I could take them into the show and they could have made that show themselves. They could have curated that show because it is so much a part of their upbringing to understand, throw an icon in front of them. They'll be able to tell you who those figures are and maybe even the period it comes from and all that sort of thing, because it is very part of a much part of the upbringing. I came to it kind of late, right? I came to Ethiopia kind of late, but, I think that makes it all really relevant and shows that connection to the past.
In the process of the curation and the research and everything that goes into it, what were some of those sort of unexpected things, like just really like you were gobsmacked? I like using that word now, but you were
Mhm.
gobsmacked, like, oh wow, didn't have any idea I would come across something like this in this process. Whether it be themes, whether it be narratives, but something that really like, blew your hair back a bit.
Yeah, I mean, something that I know because I've been studying the material. For example, Ethiopia is the second oldest Christian nation on the planet, right after Armenia. And this is something I've sort of taken for granted. I know the art that they produced in service of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. And I actually the one of the revelations was not about an object, but was about talking with one of my previous colleagues at the Walters, and she said, "Well, we're talking about Christian art here. We're talking about an icon together," and she's like, maybe you want to talk about how Christianity and colonialism in Africa. And I was like, hang on, that's not the case with Ethiopia. Ethiopia was never colonized, only nation in Africa that never colonized. And B, no, they've been Christian since the fourth century. King Azana adopts Christianity just shortly after, Constantine says, oh, it's okay to practice in the Roman Empire. So this is super early on. And immediately start, you see the cross appearing in coinage that the emperors are producing. And then, of course, later on, you see icons and manuscripts and wall paintings. So that was something that I kind of knew, but wanted to really bring that to the fore that, like, I think people, when they hear Africa and Christianity, they think one thing, but that's not the story at all with Ethiopia. And so it was more of a revelation, like what other people think and what other people's perceptions are of Ethiopia. So that it's kind of a maybe not what you're expecting as a revelation, but that was definitely for me for sure. Also, just thinking about how early on Ethiopia had relationships with surrounding cultures. The story that used to be told about Ethiopia was that, all these different people came into Ethiopia and they sort of changed the course of Ethiopian history. And I think it's, the narrative needs to be flipped at this point, really, and to think about, how is Ethiopia impacting moving outward and what were these relationships it had. So, like, my big soapbox is always, people traveled in the Middle Ages, right? We think that because they didn't have planes or fast boats or anything like that back then, that people just kind of stayed in the town that they were born and that was it. And that's not at all the case. So even though, the journeys were hard, you could contract some crazy disease, all these various things, people did travel. They traveled to trade with other cultures. They traveled for religious purposes. They traveled just to explore the world. So as a result of that, you find, Ethiopia had connections with India going back to the 5th, 6th century CE. So, things that you wouldn't necessarily think would take place. So I think understanding that those very early long distance travel that happened from Ethiopia, that I think was a big revelation for me, and trying to understand, how much the story is shaped by a Western narrative of what happened in Ethiopia. And in fact, when you put Ethiopia at the center, you get a very different story. So, it's in the Horn of Africa, right? It's right located where, Europe and Asia and Africa all come together. So you've got, relationships across the Red Sea, Indian Ocean, up the Nile to the Mediterranean. So it's a very sort of expansive network, and it was one of the great ancient empires, actually, the Aksumite Empire, from the 2nd to the 7th century CE. So, those are all the things that kind of struck me, and I think. So I first went to Ethiopia. I wanted to go for many, many years, but I finally went for the first time in January of 2020, and just to be there in that place and to you're going to the palace of the Queen of Sheba, right? And you see the bones of Lucy, which was like, the first hominid, right? We're all descendant from Lucy, right? I mean, that's mind blowing. I mean, I think especially for, an American, where our history, our recorded history doesn't go back that far. And so that I think that's one of the things that I hope people understand, through this exhibition, and sort of that deep, really long history, and kind of getting that in front of people is something I'd like to do.
And you took me back to my history class. You mentioned Lucy. I was like, oh, I remember this from high school. That's great. And then having sort of that notion of, those pieces of history that I think can be left out of the conversation when talking about a particular group of folks, particular culture. And it's just like, we want to talk about it, but not have them in it. It's like, oh, no. We have to have them in it. This is actually the story. It's a more well-rounded version of it. And, I definitely relate to that. And even doing this, there's so many conversations around, this is what Baltimore is. This is what the culture is here. But then it's like talking to people who are DMV centric. And it's like, no, talk to people from Baltimore. Talk to people in the scene in Baltimore.
Yeah.
So that actually answers another question. You're like winning. I don't like that you're winning.
You gave me these questions in advance, Rob. I prepare.
I love that. A lot of people don't. You'd be surprised. In almost 700 interviews, it's like 45 people prepare. No one else really prepares. So is there an item or an artifact or something within the exhibit that is just like, now you absolutely have to check this out when you pull up, like, what is that one for you that it's just like, definitely pay really close attention to this one? This, like, obviously the whole sort of exhibition, but this one is the one that is just like the crown.
Yeah, I had a hard time with this one. I came up with two, but I'll try to stick to one. So we have a really remarkable object in the Walters collection. So again, we have one of the largest collections of Ethiopian art outside of Ethiopia. That's kind of where this whole exhibition began. It's called a couple names: processional fan, a liturgical fan. So what it is a very actually a couple strips of parchment, so animal skin, stitched together. So it's kind of like a giant rectangle, but it's folded like an accordion. So it's basically, I don't know if you remember those little fans you sometimes used to get, sort of cheapo fans. It's like, metal, and you kind of spread it. No one can see what I'm doing, but you spread it and you get this paper fan that opens up and into kind of a circle. So this is what this object was. So at each end of that long strip of parchment, you would have boards, and they too would sort of, you could splay them out and connect them at the bottom. And then you would have this circular icon made of parchment. And on this parchment, you've got all these standing figures. Some are identified, some are not. They're all, either drawn from the Hebrew Bible. They're drawn from the New Testament, Christian New Testament. Mary, we've got archangels. And so so in the exhibition, we'll have this fan. We can't actually put it into fan form anymore because it's dangerous for the piece. But we can have it spread out, and it's huge. And you get this whole kind of procession of figures as you look down the piece. And our intro wall actually has a few of these standing figures blown up really big, kind of introduced in the exhibition. So you'll see it on the front wall. You'll come in. This is a kind of object that not really very many other places produced. So, and there's only about 6 or 7 of them that survive, and all the rest are in Ethiopia. So, this is something that I hope will be very eye-catching for people, and also just as an object, it's super unusual. I think it comes from a monastery called Gunda Gunde, which is kind of on the border between Ethiopia and present-day Eritrea. And that monastery did some really crazy things with parchment, not just like regular books. They did lots of these folding objects. They were really, this is kind of why I got into the Middle Ages, was there is some crazy things that people came up with. And this is one of them for sure. And it was very unique, I think, to this monastery in Ethiopia. So we have a very beautiful, intact example that people can look at. And it is really a showstopper.
I love it. I love it. Now, you have my interest peaked, and now even more than when we started, right? Like I'm learning, right? Mm-hmm. So with it, I'm going to ask that you just tell me that second one as well. I mean, you kind of,
sure.
Yeah, please.
So I am going to stick to the Christian context because that's my background, what I come from in terms of studying the art. But I should also say we've got a myriad. I tried to represent Ethiopia as best as possible in all its facets in this show. So we have objects of Islamic Ethiopian art, Jewish Ethiopian art. We've got objects from the south of Ethiopia, which they did a lot of three-dimensional sculpture. So I don't want to, downplay any of those things, but just as an icon and this kind of gets back to my background, we have a painting that's been on long-term loan to our collection that's by a known Ethiopian artist. So his name was Fascination. It means fruit of Zion. And he was active at the court of the king Zara Yacob, who was reigned in the 15th century. So he worked for that emperor. That emperor decided that every church should have an icon of the Virgin Mary and Christ. And so this sent all the artists into a tizzy trying to create all these icons. So Fascination was an icon painter working in the court. But also at the time where the Italians are kind of coming in. So they're working side by side, they're taking from each other, they're passing ideas back and forth. And so there's a very large icon by him, like I said, that's been on long-term loan in our galleries. If you've been to the Walters, it was in our Ethiopian art galleries, and now will be in the show. And it is the Virgin and Child, but it's got the 2 archangels on either side of Mary. They've got their swords drawn. So they're kind of her honor guard. And it's got inscriptions all over the place, like I mentioned before. This was an icon that I studied when I was in graduate school. And then I walk into the Walters and there it is. And it's just, it's big, it's impressive, beautiful patterning on the drapery. The color palette is exactly what you see in Ethiopian art. So I think the very fact that we know who this artist was, we don't have a lot of named artists from the Middle Ages in general. But we know his name, and he was active in the court, working at this very exciting moment where artists are just churning out icons and trying to come up with, for the first time, this kind of format to depict these different themes and stories. So that's another one that I feel like people shouldn't miss. And I put it next to an Italian painting, which I think hasn't been done in a very long time, just to kind of show where those connections could be, and what kind of themes they were passing back and forth. And we've got a beautiful set of niches design that our designer, Katie Neighbor, came up with. The niche for the Fascination is based on architecture from Lalibela. That's where the famous rock-cut churches are in Ethiopia. And then on the right, a kind of rounded arch where you see in sort of Italian Renaissance architecture. So I'm excited for people to see that.
I am as well. And I'm excited to see it, I guess. You're the curator.
I'm conjuring it up for you right here.
But it is one of those things, and I like that you're kind of describing sort of like how things are arranged, and that you're able to see it next to like other, see sort of those reference points. Mm-hmm. I love that because you're able to go in and it's sort of like in a sense, like a retrospective of like, you're going to see this maybe in a different way. You may be familiar with this style or this in images and so on, but catching it in a sort of different way with this different context, that's great.
Mhm.
So what are your hopes? And I had like two real questions left. What are your hopes for, the community connecting to this when, because it's coming soon, dropping soon, as
Mhm.
you know,
Yep.
off the presses soon. So, as it were. So what are your hopes for like the exhibition and, around sort of like the community involvement and just sort of what people will take out of it? Is it, more interest in this sort of like this work? Is it just everyone coming all the time? Well, obviously, but what are you hoping?
Yeah, I mean, what was really important to me was, I've been studying this material for almost 25 years now, but I'm not Ethiopian. And so it was really important for me to really forge those relationships with the community and to make sure that I was telling the story as they would want it told. So they've been in, they're curators, they're historians, they're professors to kind of help me sort of figure out the different ways that we can talk about Ethiopia in relationship to these different cultures outside. And then also our community advisory committee. So these are all individuals from the DMV area. We have Ethiopian Orthodox priests, we have artists, we have teachers, we have nurses, who all of whom agreed to sort of give their thoughts about different aspects of the exhibition. So, I worked at the Getty Museum before I came to the Walters, and I also work with the Ethiopian community there. And it's just if you find sort of the real stakeholders in the community, they kind of get the word out. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for here. I'm hoping that people know that we have this collection. I'm telling all the people all the time that I meet who are Ethiopian, hey, we've got this collection of art, right around the corner at the Walters, and they had no idea what I'm talking about. So, just to sort of get people to be aware that they can actually come to the Walters anytime and see Ethiopian art, not just when this show is up, and sort of get their interest going, and to bring some of those people in has been a real rewarding experience for me. Like I said, I stand in front of these paintings and these objects, and they have all the things to say, about them. They know these objects that they don't, even though they haven't studied these things in detail, they know exactly what they're looking at. And so that's been really rewarding for me. And I hope that, in getting the word out for the exhibition, that people come, that they continue to come after the show comes down, because we always have Ethiopian art on view. What's also been super helpful is to have I have a guest curator on the contemporary component of the show. That's Tzadeh Makonnen, who's a DC-based artist, born and raised in Washington, but born to Ethiopian immigrant parents. And she is, she really calls back. So she's an artist, she's a curator. She calls back to Ethiopian historical art in her work. And we're really thrilled to have a piece of hers. It's a piece that's she calls them her light towers. So they are, it's a piece called Sanait and Nahom, the Peacemaker and the Comforter. It actually was purchased by the National Museum of African Art, the Smithsonian, back in 2020, height of the pandemic. And but they never were able to put it on view. So we actually have borrowed it for a year to be in our Ethiopian galleries, because we, install a lot of things to go into the show. So her piece is literally lighting up that space. These are towers lit from within. She sort of pierces the towers with the shapes of Ethiopian processional crosses used in the Ethiopian church, and then they're lit from within. So they kind of make these patterns of crosses and light throughout our galleries. So working with her and getting her feedback, she's working with us to help us formulate some programming during the run of Ethiopia at the Crossroads. She's been instrumental in getting us in touch with Ethiopian churches so we can go and record some church music and have that in the galleries. This sort of thing has been really crucial for making this come to fruition. So my hope is that people will realize we always have Ethiopian art on view, and also obviously come to see the show. This is a great moment for Ethiopian art, and also then to come back with their families and their friends later on, and to really, and I hope, it has broader resonance too beyond the Ethiopian community. But as you know, Rob, this is the largest Ethiopian community outside of Ethiopia here in the DMV area. So this is something that I'm hoping will really, serve that community, and also that they'll really kind of take it in and take the time to come and visit.
Hoping so as well. That's great. That's a great answer, and well, really robust answer. I like that.
You mean I talk too much? Is that what you mean?
No, 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 no. You're making my job easier, actually. Um, so this is sort of the last real question that I have, and I think I think it's important to kind of be like still like always like engaged. I want to get you like your philosophy around it. Like, you know, this semester I'm actually teaching,
Mm.
kids, podcasting, high school kids, which is a whole new experience,
Oh,
and really
yes.
kind of sharing what my practice is and re-engaging and being, I guess, a novice or what have you, despite doing it for 15 years.
Hmm.
So that's important. Keeps me up to snuff. So for you, how do you like, what are your personal philosophies or daily practices to sustain one, your enthusiasm in curation and in art history, but also the sort of like rigor of like being like up to date, being up to stuff with it. It's
Hmm.
like, oh, this is how I could do this. This is a way of looking at this. How do you kind of just stay engaged in that way?
Yeah, that's interesting. You're talking about teaching. So last spring of 2022, I was invited by Johns Hopkins University to kind of teach a class in the art history department. Some of their professors were on leave, and they said, well, what do you want to teach? And I said, well, Ethiopia is the only thing on my brain right now, so it has to be about Ethiopia, which sounded great to them, and so I actually wound up kind of teaching the exhibition. So it was kind of I did half the class teaching the content of the exhibition, and then the second part, how do you make an exhibition? What are all the things that go into it? Because I think people don't. Your typical museum visitor doesn't know that this took 6 years for me to prepare, Ethiopia at the Crossroads, for example. So that was actually my way of also forcing myself to read a lot of the recent things that have come out about Ethiopian art, assign it to the students and I'll have to read it too, right? Because I spend a lot of my time just answering emails. So trying to squeeze in, the tons of publications that come out about this topic. People are getting more and more interested in Ethiopian art and culture. That's really hard to sort of keep up with. So one thing I did was force myself to kind of teach the material and to also hear, what the students' feedback was. I mean, we're now, I'm very, several generations beyond my students now. So, what do you think of when you think of Ethiopia? It's different than what I think of and what I grew up, experiencing like in the 80s. They're seeing different things today. So the other thing that I did during the pandemic, not great times, but one great advantage of the pandemic is a lot of conferences and talks and papers went online. And so, I could attend a conference in, Vienna and, Addis Ababa and New York, without ever leaving my desk.
Yeah.
So that actually helped me to sort of see what people are working on right now. What's the current work that's happening on Ethiopia and various other cultures connected to it. So that was sort of, it wasn't shorthand. I spent many hours, online doing this, but it was a way to sort of keep current with what's going on right now. What are people thinking about? What are the questions they're asking? Giving some talks myself and getting people's feedback. So that is, I would say, sort of, two of the major things that I did. And also, I relied a lot on people in my advisory committees to, tell me about what they're thinking about, what they're working on. I challenge them to think about, well, what is the relationship between Armenian art and Ethiopian art, maybe in a way that they hadn't thought of before. So, and also in the end, I just have to kind of come back to, the objects, right? The objects are the things that are always my inspiration. So, keep looking closely. What else do you notice? That kind of sparks new things. It makes you kind of run down lines of research and what have you. So, and there is a catalog publication with the Ethiopia at the Crossroads show. So you get sort of a smattering of, all the things that people are thinking about from their various fields in relation to Ethiopian art. We've got some cutting edge conservation research we've done here at the Walters. So we have one of the oldest conservation departments in any museum in the US. And we were able to look very closely at our Ethiopian art, do some analysis on it, discover things about the materials and techniques of the artists that nobody's really done before. There's a couple of research groups that have done it, but not really. And so that too is in the catalog, really bringing those kind of up to date ways of looking at objects to Ethiopian art. So, having all those things going on, I mean, it kind of keeps you going, right? That you asked about, like, what is that? How do you keep that spark going? Well, when you make some new discoveries about the kind of wood they used in Ethiopian panel painting, which is totally not the same as what people have always said they painted on, like, that's super exciting. Yeah, that's really uncovering, knowledge that was lost, and we're kind of bringing it back. So, those are a few of the things that have kept me through all the emails and all the back and forth that that goes on in my normal day to day.
I hear that, and thank you because when it's those moments of like, all right, I'm curious about something. It's
Hmm.
just like it's like a what is it, an earworm will have you. I can't get it out. It's just like I
Yeah.
gotta and yeah, I think it's just trying to satisfy a curiosity. I think sort of just looking at like what are the questions and then what are the new questions? How do you go deeper and find those sort of like connections, even if it's the ones that people are like, I don't know, bro. It's like, well, I'm going to express how it is and maybe a connection or, sort of
Hmm.
what that overlap looks like. And that's something that's there, but always kind of going back in. I try to play with how I might do this sometimes just to really open something back up. Like, can I just do this without researching? Can I do this without preparing in the same way and
Hmm.
really seeing what comes out of it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I got a couple rapid fire questions. That was kind of the
Hmm.
wrap up of the real questions. You got through unscathed. So I
Here
sort
we
of
go.
these are kind of softballs, but I don't know. I don't know if they are. So I have three of them for you. The first one, which this might be our one actually. Which figure for maybe art history would you want to have a conversation with, maybe over coffee or tea or whatever your beverage of choice is? Beverage is a
Mhm.
part of this.
So I did say before, we don't have a lot of like named medieval artists, so that makes it hard. But I think I would love to sit down with a monk or a nun who produced manuscripts and to hear about like what goes through their head as they're sort of copying line after line, if they're a scribe, or like painting an image of, somebody who's a holy figure to them. Like why, what inspires you to do this sort of thing. So, um, I wrote for my dissertation, I wrote about a German manuscript, German medieval manuscript, but um, it was commissioned by one individual priest and we have his name. So like, could I sit down with somebody like that and be like, okay, what did this book mean for you? What did the creation of this book mean for you? That's kind of where I would go with that.
Thank you. So curation, and by the way, I will say I did notice when you were mentioning, you're like, yeah, back in 2020, I was like, that's almost 4 years ago. So think
Mm-hmm.
the sort of time that goes into the process, and I was like, oh no, I've listened to people. I'm a data analyst by day, so as soon as the number is mentioned, I'm like, how long ago? But
Mm-hmm.
it just says the work that goes into it. So without sounding gauche or what have you, but in your opinion, what is curation?
So I guess when you're a museum curator, I feel like I have a very active role in, I mean, we like to throw around this. I love that people know what the word curator means now, but they also throw it around in a way that I'm not so fond of. So, um, curation comes from curare, so it's the Latin word. I have to bring out the Latin right because I'm a medievalist. It means to care for, right? So, like, I'm actually caring for this collection. Yes, I am selecting, objects I think should be added to the collection. When I create an exhibition, I make a selection of objects to go into the show. But I'm caring for those objects, and one way to care for them is, what our conservators do sometimes, and also like the way I handle objects. But also, how do we convey them to people. So I also have a background in museum education. So I love talking in front of objects. I love standing there and kind of getting people to look closely, asking them questions, hearing their thoughts. I always learn something new whenever I give a tour from the group that I'm giving a tour to because they all come with different sets of backgrounds, see different things than I would. So being a curator, I think, is caring for the collection in that you physically care for the objects, but you also sort of care for teaching them to people. So you're sort of making it so that people understand why they are important to preserve in museums and why we should continue to learn about them, even if they might be 1,000 years old or more.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Great answer. This is the last one. I'm always very interested. Usually you get a food question, but I don't have the food question in here. I
You
have a
don't have
different.
come on, it's Ethiopia. You got to have a food question.
I usually have a food question, but this one is a little different. I I'm always curious as to how folks do sort of these restorative practices. Like, some folks meditate, some folks are like, I need to have my afternoon tea, or don't talk to me before I have my coffee, or whatever the thing it might be. What is sort of that, when those emails get a bit much, or that just the process of doing the day to day is just really, a lot. What are those restorative practices for you? Is there like one that really pops up for you? Is it going to the park? Is it, having that tea or that fitness or whatever it might be?
Yeah, I'm not great at doing that, Rob. I haven't I just tell you right now. But probably I would say it's kind of a practice that I have to do anyway, sort of enforced practice, which is, going home, spending some time. I have two kids with my family and sort of like stepping out of that moment of like, okay, it's not all about Ethiopian art. There's other stuff going on. My son's learning to read. Okay, well, let's, just kind of taking a step back and realizing like, where everybody else is in their world and their, in that moment. And so I think that's probably the most restorative thing for me.
I hear you. I hear you. It literally was a conversation I was having before this. It's like, hey, man, it's not all bad, man. It'll be all, life is life, man. um, but thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on here and share a bit about the show, and share a bit about your background. This has been great. And two, I want to invite and encourage you to share any final thoughts, website, social media, all of that good stuff. Kind of those final second like pitches, like come on through, share.
Yeah.
The floor is yours.
We have an incredible show. I want to emphasize it's only 3 months long. So it is opening on December 3rd at the Walters with a big opening day. We're going to have a spice workshop run by some local folks that I know. I just brought back the spices from Ethiopia for them. We just handed them off in the parking lot this morning. So they are fresh from Ethiopia. I was just there in October again. They're going to come and do a spice workshop, talk about berbere spice. We're going to have music. We're going to have a coffee ceremony. We've got lots of programming throughout the run of the show, and those can be found on our website. We've got flyers that I'm going to start putting in Ethiopian businesses around. So beautiful brochure that they made to explain all that programming. Like I said, it's only till March 3rd. I know some people think, oh, yeah, I'll see that show. But like really, it's 3 months. So, and that's because we have lots of light sensitive materials in the show. So we've got, and thank you, Sydney, for putting this little tag here. So you can follow the Walters at the Walters Art Museum. And wait a minute, I lost the chat. Sydney, I lost the chat. We've got, the exhibition, like I said, 3 months, light sensitive materials. So don't sleep on this. Please come and see us. When it's dark and it's winter and you need some light. One of the things that my community advisory wanted us to convey was the concept of light, and that everything should be, that's the design concept. You'll see that. We've used the colors of the Ethiopian flag, which are bright red, gold, and green. So that's also there. Bring a little sunshine to your winter days. And the exhibition will also be traveling to 2 other venues. So, and that's the other reason why it's only 3 months here. So after here, it will go to the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts, just north of Boston. Excuse me. It will go to the Toledo Museum of Art in Toledo, Ohio after that. So if you have friends, family there, please tell them about it. Please go to see it there if you can't see it at Baltimore, but please see it at Baltimore. It'll be, extra special here. And like I said, just from December 3rd till March 3rd. So pretty easy dates to remember. So people can look for any updates, look at posts. You can follow us at the Walters Art Museum on Instagram and Facebook, and at the Walters_museum on X/Twitter. So we will be putting out all kinds of social media posts. We have an amazing promo video that's being completed right now. We've got, wonderful posts by Karina Ingram, who's been doing a great job getting the word out about, our Sade Makonnen piece and various other things. So keep your eye tuned to that. And also on our website as well, you can see sort of a basic overview of the exhibition.
There you have it, folks. I want to again thank Christine Sciacca from the Walters Art Museum for coming on and sharing a bit of her story, and Ethiopia at the Crossroads. And for Christine, I am Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, and community in and around Baltimore. You've just got to look for it.